My name is Michael Dwyer. As DJ announced, I could get the clicking device. That's its official name, I think. So this is Visiting Michigan Cider Mills, and we're going to focus on Rochester area cider mills, but we can move around the state if you like. So who am I? Well, I'm a travel writer, a journalist, and a cider mill enthusiast. Self-titled. RochesterMedia.com is a local news source. We do everything online. I'm their editor. Does anybody receive their newsletter? A few folks? Great. Well, thanks for being here. Yeah, it's similar to the Patch, but without all the annoying pop-ups and ads. So it's clean, and we keep it family-friendly, and it's not hard news. It's fun news, I hope. And then RochesterWriters.com, I mentioned that with the flyer. That's every fall, and we also do a spring event. So if that's something you're interested in, please pick up a flyer. So what is a cider mill? This is a long description, but basically the cider mill is considered to be the location or the equipment used to make the cider, and that can be used to make juice or hard cider or applejack or apple wine and other products. But specifically, cider mill is describing the device that crushes the apples into juice. They're normally located near apple orchards for obvious reasons. So before we got started, we were informally chatting about other locations around the country. Cider mills are centrally located in the Midwest and in New England, not too many other places. However, apples grow in all 50 states, and I would imagine that they make cider at their orchards. They just don't have the fanfare about going to the cider mill and making it an attraction. So, cider mills are all about cider and donuts. I have researched this, and I cannot figure out what the donut factor is with cider mills. Does anybody know? Because they're good. Okay. So, right. So you got one thing that's really, really good for you, and the other not so much. So we balance that out by having cider and donuts. So, of course, there's the fresh pressed apple cider, warm batter-made donuts, which are just so yummy and fresh from a cider mill. Everyone loves them the best there. And they do other baked goods, pies and muffins and turnovers and dumplings and breads, as well as it's a great location to get that old-fashioned candy that many of us remember from a kid or your parents might have told you about, jellies, jams, preserves, farm-fresh produce, and all of your kind of fall harvesty type of things, right? Well, we need to know how to make cider. I think we know the main ingredient, apples. So they're picked, and in Michigan, all apples are used for cider, hand-picked and what is fallen on the ground. If you are a facility that does not treat your cider, you cannot use off the ground. That has to be hand-picked apples. That is, of course, for fears of what could happen once it falls on the ground. But there are very few cases, almost none in Michigan, that are ever of health concern. So I would never worry about cider from Michigan. Bins and bushels are used to transport the cider or the apples. Their apples are run through an apple washer with brushes and cold water. It just kind of takes off the residue and any pesticides that may have been used on them. They are ground into pumice and pressed and then treated. There are three ways cider is treated. One is untreated, so actually nothing happens to it. It's just pressed apples. Then there's ultraviolet light or UV treated, which is a way to eradicate any potential health hazard. And then there's the traditional pasteurization. Just like milk, it's boiled, and that removes any possibility of contaminants. So let's take a look at it. This is a picture of the old setup at Goodison going through the washer. And I will move over here and make DJ have to really work here. So they're dumped into this nice wooden contraption. They fall in here, and here's where the water and brushes are. They pop out into this little hopper, and they go up a conveyor belt and use gravity to drop into a grinder and then turned into pumice and then pumped into the press room. And here's a nice layer. Has anyone seen this at any of the local cider mills? Kind of fun, right? So they layer it up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's usually 7 is what I count almost everywhere I go. These are what they call blankets or cloths, press cloths. They're kind of like a canvas, synthetic materials, where it allows it to keep the pulp inside and let all the juice come out. This happens to be at Yates. They have a very big press there. And then it's bottled. Some of the cider mills actually have a nice bottling system like this where the juice is poured into that contraption up top and then bottled. Some do it the old-fashioned way like Rochester and Goodison. They just tap it one at a time, put the cap on, and put it in the cooler. We have somewhere around 200 varieties of apples in Michigan. There are a lot of varieties, I think 2,500 altogether. These are some of the more popular ones. Does anybody have a favorite apple for eating? Honeycrisp, Empire, Gala. Galas are good. This kind of gives you a rundown of what they're best for. I find they're all best for eating. This is put out by the Michigan Apple Committee. This is their fall harvest report. It kind of gives you some dates here on what's coming up. Rome is coming out very soon. Ida Reds were early this year. Cortland's were early. So cider, who's been to the cider mill in September? Okay, did you go back recently? Did you notice any changes? So cider, right, it gets sweeter. So the early apples are not as mature and they're tart. So like the Ida Reds, the Ginger Golds, and they just don't have the sweetness from being on the trees and maturing. As the apples get more mature and there's more varieties available, such as Jonah Gold, Honeycrisp, Gala, Fiji, some of the other good ones. Empire is a great one. And Northern Spies, I find, add some body to cider. Yes? Yes and no. I don't think it's the frost. It is the fact that the frost comes later in the season and they are mature and dropping at that point. So the frost will help the apples to want to finish and drop from the trees, and that's when they're the best, is just before they fall. Oh, okay, I did have one more apple cider joke. So what does this say? Nope, it's just up to here. Pasteurized. Okay. So we talked about the 3 kinds of cider, pasteurized, obviously one of them. Treating cider is the untreated, may or may not be filtered. The pasteurization heated up to 160 degrees for just a few seconds and cooled, just like the process with milk, and then UV light treated. The UV light treated is sometimes called cold pasteurized because it is the same outcome. It is perfectly safe for little ones, for women that are pregnant and nursing. Those tend to be some concerns with unpasteurized cider, but UV light treated is the equivalent to pasteurized as far as safety concerns. It also maintains the color and the flavor, and I find that UV light treated cider is the tastiest. So some apple facts. 2,500 varieties in the U.S. Only the crab apple is native to North America. A little tiny, tart, sour one. Colonists brought the apples in the 17th century. They are fat-free, sodium-free, and cholesterol-free, and only contain natural sugar. A bushel weighs about 42 pounds, and 1 gallon of cider takes about 36 apples. If you have an apple tree, some of the local mills will do custom presses. So if you want to take your apples in and have your own cider made, that's a fun way to go. And it freezes for up to a year. So it's, you know, if you get 20 gallons, it's hard to drink all of that in a week. So you can freeze some of it or give it away. This is kind of hard to see, I know, but it's something else that the Michigan Apple Committee puts out. It's just kind of what is projected for this year. But 28 million bushels is typical. 50% are gobbled up right away. Those are eating apples. And because of the way that they store apples now, apples are pretty much available year-round. So they use a cold storage. They suck all the oxygen out of these rooms, and then the apples are preserved for about 10 months. And since apples mature for 2 or 3 months in the fall, we can have apples year-round. Oh, and we're the third largest apple producer in the United States, second to Washington and New York, or third to Washington and New York. Okay, Johnny Appleseed. Yeah, he was a real guy. John Chapman was his name. And he is one of the reasons why we have so many apples and apple trees in the United States, because of his nurseries in the Midwest, and he sold and traded them all across the country. But the story of him crossing the country and dropping seeds is not true. You don't get good apple trees that way. They have to be produced by splicing them, I believe is how they do that. So seeds are not the best way to get apples. They're modified and create the wonderful apples that we have, and they're always making new ones. I forget the agricultural term, but they splice them. Grafting. They graft the apple trees and produce more apple trees from an existing apple tree, and that's how they get the producing apples that are the big, juicy apples that we all know from the grocery store and from cider mills. Otherwise, they'd all be little, tiny, tart apples. So we've been modifying the way that we do our agriculture for a long time. But going to the cider mill, there's over 100 in Michigan, 5 in the Rochester area. Yates has 2 locations. They got the big one that we're probably familiar with. We've been stuck in that traffic going by them at some point. And the other one's in Lake Orion. Goodison Cider Mill and Payne Creek are both on Orion Road, only a quarter mile from each other and not very far from here. Middleton is technically not in Rochester. It's across the street from Rochester Hills on DeQuinder, just north of M59. And then Rochester Cider Mill on Orion Road. Used to be called Sargent's Cider Mill. And if anybody's been around for a long time and remembers that. Here's some other ones to check out that are near Rochester: Franklin, Blake, Stony Creek, and Westview. And these in the Romeo area have more activities, hay rides and haunted attractions. So if you're going to make a family adventure of it, certainly those are some to look at. Goodison is always rated one of the best in and out because it's easy and small and no lines. Yates is always rated just a great destination because of the trails and the stream, and they have a lot of things going on there. Let's talk about some of the ones right here. Yates, they are UV light treated. They are busy all the time. You can go on a Tuesday morning and stand in line, but they do a really good job of getting people in and out. Great outdoor atmosphere, and it's their second location at Canterbury Village in Lake Orion. Who's been to Yates? Most of us, yes, of course. Mike and Katie Titus that run it do a wonderful job, and I cannot say enough good things about them. And they're still water powered. So the water wheel doesn't do anything; it just spins. It's for looks. The water actually comes through turbine jets, and that's what powers the press. In the village of Goodison, on Orion Road. UV light treated is Goodison Cider Mill. Easy in and out. Small play area outside. On Sundays they do have activities, a bounce house and balloon creations or something. So if you're going to take the kids or go as a family, Sundays are the day to do it. Consequently, if there is a line, that's when you'll find it is on a Sunday. They recently painted their building blue. It used to be green, and before that, red. And I can't figure out why it's blue, because that doesn't say agriculture cider mill to me at all. But I don't make those calls. They painted it themselves. In Rochester Cider Mill, theirs is untreated. Their cider, they do nothing to it. It doesn't go through UV light. It's not pasteurized. It's not heated. And they do a variety of flavors. They don't have any different flavors now, but the one on tap will be grape coming up, probably as we get closer to Halloween. Yes? So you're going to have some truists out there that think you should do absolutely nothing to cider. You should just squeeze the apples and drink it. And I certainly can understand that. UV light does not heat, right? It's cold pasteurized. So in my opinion, it doesn't take away at all from the flavor or the color, and I find it just as tasty, and it's got that added safety benefits. But some people are concerned because you're using a UV light on your cider. It doesn't break down the pectins like heat pasteurization. So untreated cider and UV light treated cider are both what you would want if you're going to make an adult beverage from it or move it into a different product. Pasteurized cider does break down the pectins, destroys the flavor, and you can't do as much with it after that process. Is that what you're thinking? Okay, well, yeah, you mentioned just like milk. So they have a fun little ancient farm implement museum there at Rochester. So we did the count on Yates. Who's been to Goodison? And who's been to Rochester? Great, you guys are professionals. And Middleton, north of M59. Who's been there? Is Lucky the cat still running around? They have a cute gold and white kitty that runs around. Anyway, if you go to Middleton, the one thing you should definitely get there are their candied apples and pies. They're known for their pies. Candied apples are very difficult to find. So they do them there. They make them there. That's a good source for candied apples. I'll give you the one thing to get at all of these cider mills. So candied apples at Middleton, pistachio nut bread at Goodison. Yates, you go there for the atmosphere. And Paint Creek, you would go there for their apple cider milkshake. For years I've been thinking, because I love milkshakes, so milkshakes and we go back a long time, what can you do in the fall to a milkshake? And I thought about adding cider to it. I just never tried it. They've perfected that mix. I've tried it at home, and I've come pretty close, and it's good. But if you go there to Paint Creek, and they're mostly a restaurant, right? They're mostly a food establishment, but they do cider and donuts in the fall. Try their cider milkshake. Where have you tried? Most of them have carameled apples. Goodison are big, and they're on Granny Smith, so they keep a long time. So you've got that sweet and tart. Rochester makes all theirs right there, and they're a little smaller, but they look good. I'm not a caramel apple person, but they look pretty good. And they've got all the flavored cider. That's why you go to Rochester's for their flavored cider. So Paint Creek bounces between Blake's and Miller's Big Red on their cider. They don't make cider there anymore except some small handcrafted batches from a small press. It's untreated, it's unfiltered. You get about 10 days, maybe 2 weeks on it. It's good, but they don't have a lot of it. But what they do is they use Miller's or Blake's. I think they're using Miller's right now, and they have some orchards. So they are taking their apples to Miller's and pressing some of their apples, some of Miller's apples, and creating their own blend. So while it's just pasteurized cider from a big cider mill, but it's their blend. You're not going to get it at Miller's or Blake's because they're using some of their own apples. So it's definitely a little different. And they have the Paint Creek Trail and the new Paint Creek Trail XS. So if you're a biker or a runner or jogger or you like walking on the trail, that's a great location. Also, this building, they cleared the trees on the back patio. So you can get out there just Monday through Friday, or you have to walk around, I believe, on the weekends. But that back patio is a nice view of the river right now because they've cleared all that out. I just saw this photo and I had to grab it for this presentation because Pure Michigan is always doing fun things. So Michigan.org will help you find all of the cider mills across the state. They're in, like I said, 100 of them. So big concentration here, big concentration in the Grand Rapids region, and then of course more up in the Traverse City region. Many have, so this is how you do it. If you go to their website, Michigan.org, who's been to the Michigan.org website? Oh, that's great. You know, it's award winning. They keep winning awards and they do a great job with their site. You go to their website and there's a tab called Play, and you hit Attractions. And then you search for farms and mills. Unfortunately, they don't have just mills because it would be a lot easier. But you're going through all of these lavender farms and tree farms and cider mills to find that. And then you pick a city and you can change the radius of your search. So if you're traveling across the state or you know where you're going, do a search. If it's in the fall, try a new cider mill. Who knew we had an apple committee here in Michigan? So they come up with all these stats and figures and talk about apples. So this year, our estimate is 20 million bushels, which is down, as you can see. Last year was 28 million, 24 in 2014. Oh, 27, I missed 2015 somewhere. And in 2013, it was 30 million. That was, I think, that big record bumper crop we had. Most people around here, their apple trees were breaking. You might be one of them because they were so loaded with apples. And that followed up that 2012 just dismal year of 3 million bushels because we had a series of frosts in Michigan and it just really wiped out. Most of the cider mills were able to make cider using their apples, but they did truck in some from out of state to fill the gap. And there's a Michigan Apple Queen. So if you didn't know there was a Michigan Apple Committee, you probably didn't know there was a Michigan Apple Queen. But evidently, Hannah Rash, who attends Davenport University, is this year's Apple Queen. They have to be connected to the industry somehow to win, right? I've submitted several times, but they have not accepted me. Usually they are, I know, I promised no more jokes, but here I go. So there she is with the runner-up. So cider mills are fun for all ages, walking trails, hay rides, haunted attractions. And for those that are 21 and older, hard cider is becoming very popular. Has anyone gone to any place to get hard cider? Where have you tried? Very common. In Europe? So cider in Europe, the word cider means alcohol from apples. Here we refer to cider meaning sweet cider. We add hard cider to make it an adult beverage. And of course there's activities for children such as corn mazes and petting farms and pony rides. I guess adults can do those too. So I have some tips for visiting cider mills. They are normally family-run businesses. They are orchards, and they are farm people. And if you're a farm person or you know a farm person, you know that it's a little different of a work environment because the farm is very demanding. So when they say they're open 9 to 6, it might not be exactly 9 to 6. So call ahead, ask when they press cider if that's something you want to go and see. Watching cider made is really, really, really exciting once in your life. All of the equipment, the noise, the bees, the contraptions, it is interesting to watch. And every cider mill does it a little different, but very similar. I mean, they're crushing apples, essentially. There are two kinds that I have seen. Earlier you saw the Yates, which is the sandwiched, layered style. And then there's some that run on conveyor belts, and they're crushed in smaller machinery, and they continue on this conveyor belt as they go through all of the steps. So I would ask what activities they have for kids and on what days and at what time. And most of these types of things are outdoors and weather permitting. So if you're planning a big family adventure, make sure you call ahead and check on when they do things. Ask what form of payment they take. Again, not all of them take credit cards, which is amazing. Some of them will take bushels of apples as payment. You can ask if they have inside or outside eating areas. Why might you be interested in inside? The bees, yeah. Now, with my experience, they don't drink a whole lot of your cider, but they can be annoying. Yep. And then allergies. If you have a food allergy, a lot of the products that are made there, nuts and dairy and wheat, you want to check with them on that. And then if you have a mobility issue, again, we're in a farm-like environment, uneven ground, gravel driveways, steps. It's not always the most welcoming if you have a mobility issue or you're a slow walker. Again, I would go to the website and call. Any questions so far? You guys are pretty quiet. Yes? All the ones that I have seen use just plain cold water with brushes, plastic brushes with bristles, and the apples just kind of bounce on these bristles as the water sprays over them, and it just removes any residue, anything that might happen to them out in the tree where there's birds, you know. Oh, we're not really concerned about insects. That's just a little extra protein. Everything gets ground up. The one thing that they want to make sure that you take off are the leaves, the stem and the leaves. You don't want the wood and the leaf part. You want the apple. But the core, the skin, the seeds, that's all fine. It all gets ground up. And through the filtration system through the blankets, you're not going to get any of that. Right? You're just going to get a little, like you've seen at the bottom of your jug, a little sawdusty-like residue. And that shows that it's good local cider typically. Did we have a question over here? Yeah. No, that's just mash, apple mash. Every place is different. So some of the farmers will take it back out to their crops and use it as fertilizer and spread it around. Some will sell it for deer bait. Probably cattle feed as well. If deer like it, I'm sure cattle do. The ones around here don't sell it. This area doesn't demand it, and they produce so much of it, it just gets thrown away. But it's biodegradable, goes right back to nature. Sure, go ahead, sir.
Obviously, the cider mills here are there for the entertainment purposes all and producing a product locally. How much of it is actually, say, quote, exported to stores or businesses beyond their own store?
All of the local ones here just produce it for their own sale. Uh, all the ones we just mentioned in Rochester. But there are bigger facilities like Highs, north of Romeo. They're a massive production facility. Um, they pump out, I don't even remember, but it's gallons per minute down the conveyor belt. It's fun to go watch. They're super nice people. But they're a little further up there, I think Almont or Armada, somewhere north of Romeo, Highs. And you'll find them in most of the grocery stores all over Michigan.
Are there some kind of standards that are set that don't allow for added sugar? Because I'm always suspicious of some of the ciders in the grocery stores that seem sweet. I mean, are they adding sugars, corn syrups, what have you?
I don't think so, but it will be on the label. It would be on the label. So you're looking for 100% apple juice. Right? Right? And nothing else is added. So it should just be ingredients, apples. If there is anything on there, I would not get it. Well, apple juice is more refined, and it's all pasteurized. It's jugged, and it's not that much different. Cider is just referring to something a little more local, fresher, with an expiration date. It's got that sediment in it. That's really the only difference. Unfiltered. So all your juice is filtered and pasteurized, and that's what you find in the stores. But juice or cider, it's really about the same thing. Yes?
Is there a particular apple or combination of apples that are used to make apple cider vinegar?
I don't think you need to have a different for vinegar. I think any of it can make it. So all apples are used to make apple cider, and consequently, if you wait, it becomes hard cider, and then if you wait, it becomes vinegar by itself with some tweaking here and there. Apple cider vinegar is usually just stored in barrels and waits till it turns to vinegar. When it comes to making cider, a variety, a blend of apples is what's best. So Franklin Cider Mill, a few people have been to Franklin, they have their blended cider, and for a little bit more money, you can get their 100% Honeycrisp cider. And they advertise it's like biting into a Honeycrisp apple. It's very good. And where do those Honeycrisp apples come from for? Okay. So yeah, so usually your not very attractive apples are what's used for making cider. They're smaller or they're very large. They're knotty looking. The graded apples, as they call it, would be your eating apples. That 50% are gobbled up right away in Michigan. So they're prettier. They look good. That's what people put in bags and take off the shelf, and people want pretty apples. And I've seen a lot of those go into making cider as well, but typically they take the ones that aren't as attractive because you're not biting into them. Oh. Any questions? Oh, we're at the question part. Sure.
Distilling has become sort of
Blake's makes hard cider, so I would try them. They're probably the closest that I can think of. I think Miller's is doing a wine or a hard cider as well, but I haven't been out there lately. So, and Blake's makes a really good one if you want to head out there. And it's also in the stores locally. The cider mill she was referring to that was trying to do hard cider that was having trouble is Rochester Cider Mill. They are in Oakland Township. They're a little slower to make things happen out there, but they may pursue that and eventually be able to make hard cider there, which I think would be wonderful. But they are, yeah, it's a local politics. But that's okay. We're talking local cider mills, so that happens. They're all unique. They're all different. They're all fun. There's a reason to go to each one of them, and I would love for all of you to try them all on the same weekend if you like. So cider mills, September and October. Halloween comes and they crash. Business drops off. You folks can change that by going to them in November and December. Yes. So I mentioned at the beginning how I'm a writer. I did produce a story called Shorter Lines and Sweeter Cider, because that's what you get in November and December. The cider gets sweeter, and there's no lines. The bees have died or gone home, and it's a great time to go. And yeah, it's a little chillier out there, but you can get hot cider or hot mulled cider, hot spiced cider. And question. I am not familiar with any in Michigan. Does anybody know of an organic cider mill in Michigan? Organic apples are very tricky. It's very difficult to control, and most growers have decided that the best practice for growing apples is using some sort of chemicals on them for treating them from disease and insects, which disqualifies them for being organic, although there are some out there. So, yes? Well, so there's still going to be grafted more older varieties is what you're looking for, right? Older varieties of apples. Well, I don't know if they're calling them that, but see, the best apple trees are sometimes 100 years old. So in my book, I would almost call them heirloom apple trees, but they're trimmed back, and that trimming, the pruning that takes place, is what produces better apples, bigger apples. They sometimes prune the center out, so you have kind of a circle from the top, so you get more light on all sides. And that is how they are producing, again, those bigger, juicier tasting apples, far different than just the crab apples that this country started with. So it is a sweet. It's not, I don't think it's the sweetest. I think Gala is still very sweet. So when you're looking at an apple, you probably don't think much about this, but you have a white flesh and you have a yellow flesh, and they can be soft or they can be crunchy. They can be tart or they can be sweet. And my taste buds are not very discerning. They all taste like apples to me. But as the season progresses, again, you try them, you will tell the difference as you move on, right? Macintosh, very soft, right? It bruises if you look at it funny. Honeycrisp has a good crunch. Gala has a nice crunch. Empire, great crunch. Jonah Gold, Jonathan, all very good eating apples. Northern Spies, the staple for baking, right? Those are a very good apple. Wine sap, good apple. I would call that almost an heirloom because they're hard to find. I'm not sure it's in the delicious, the golden delicious and the red delicious, which of course you can tell by the bumps on the bottom, right? A lot of those are your standard lunchbox type of apples. Again, all apples I think are good for eating, but they do get sweeter as the season progresses. And Rochester Cider Mill, as well as Goodison Cider Mill, and Stony Creek makes a holiday cider. They call it a holiday cider. They use all golden delicious apples, and it's really sweet and very acidic. So I wouldn't have just a tall, cold glass of it. It's a little too much. But if you're baking or you're spicing it, you're warming it up, it's very good for that. If you're making a hard, sweet cider, very good for that. If you are making hard cider, you want, I think I mentioned this, you definitely want unpasteurized, either untreated like Rochester or UV light it like Yates or Goodison. Is that the name, or I haven't seen that. You know, there were 2,500 varieties and 200 in Michigan, and when I look at some of these lists of them, there's some I've never seen or heard of. So.
There are many orchards, but there's one up in Michigan, in Leelanau County, right up near the tip of the little finger, called Christmas Cove Orchards. And they advertise that they sell the trees as well as the apples for people who
Oh.
grow heirloom apples, for people who want to.
So there you go, Leelanau Peninsula for heirloom apple trees. It's called Christmas Cove.
Up by North Fork. Yeah, but if you wanted the tree, if you wanted one for your yard.
So if you do want to do a custom pressing, I know Goodison does them on Saturdays and Sundays. You have to have at least 3 bushels. And if you have someone else in your neighborhood that has apple trees, maybe go in together. That would be a good way to do it. Because I mentioned this, the best apple cider comes from a blend. So I find 3 apples, in my opinion, produces one of the better ciders. So the all Honeycrisp cider, it's okay, it's good. There's nothing bad about it, but I don't find it has the body that a blended cider has. So your taste buds will pick up those different apples, and sometimes you can even say, oh, yeah, that tastes like a Macintosh. So if you have discerning taste buds, you can sometimes pick up on the different varieties that are in the cider. So when you go to the cider mill, whatever one it is, ask them what they are currently using. And they're usually gonna have Honeycrisp, and they're gonna have Jonathan's, and they're gonna have Empires, and they're gonna have Paula Reds. They're very Macintosh. Those are some of the staple apples they use. But as they get sweeter, we're going to add the Golden Delicious, we're going to add the Red Delicious, and in November it's going to be super sweet. Yes, sir. Well, Paint Creek was a different kind of mill. They were a grist mill, and then that building actually burnt down and they rebuilt it. So while it looks older, I think it's 1950 or 60 that Paint Creek is. Goodison has been added on to a couple times. Someone from the historic committee told me Goodison was in the mid-40s, and I think they thought it was been since the 60s, so it's actually older than the owners think it is. But they did find a sign that said since 1926, they had a fruit stand there at Goodison. So somewhere in the 40s, they started making cider. Yeah, they really are one of the oldest, and like I said, still using water power. Great. No, you don't.
But I use red delicious apples to make pie. I use less sugar, and it stays nice and firm instead of getting mushy like some apple pies. So it makes a very good apple pie.
Hmm. Well, I think with baking, it's the same policy I find is using a blend of apples. So if you're using Northern Spy, because I think when you bake pies, a lot of people do that. If you add some of the delicious, you're going to get some. Oh, you do all delicious. Okay.
And I use a lot less sugar, which is good. And they stay firmer. Some apple pies get kind of mushy. Well, I just don't like that kind, so
Okay, so we've had this conversation about the different types of cider and all the different local mills. Shout out some of your favorites. It is for me, but they get great reviews on their cider. Yes, in October and November, not in September. I'm being honest. So again, it's because the apples being used are tart, and so these local mills are limited to the apples they can get. So I find those first few weeks of September to be really tricky to find something that is sweet. Now, some people really like tart cider, and they look forward to those first couple weeks of September at the local mills because it's going to be tarter than what normally they can get. But I find this time of year and leading into November is the nice, happy medium of cider. Not too sweet, but not tart. And it changes every batch because it depends on the apples they're getting. If you find a batch that you like when you're at a local mill, you taste test it. You're like, that is really good. Buy some extra, freeze it. Just take a little bit out and freeze it, and you can bring it out for Christmas and for Easter and some spring event. Yes, sir.
I recently read an article that gave a credit to the apple that I had never heard of before. Maybe you can yay or nay to it. They said that the apple is nature's best toothbrush.
Well, my mom used to tell me that when I was a kid. And maybe I just thought it was a way that she was trying to get you to eat your vegetables, and I never liked brushing my teeth, but so maybe that was it. But I have heard that. So, and I think I heard it recently too. Did you hear something? So absolutely, and I think one a day, sure. Whether it's a liquid version or a solid version. What is good with pop? A lot of cider mills will sell popcorn. The corn for popping. I just thought it was kind of the end of season, right? Harvest that goes along with it, but maybe that's why. So we heard Goodison. Let's name out some others. Yates. No, so the one in Lake Orion is at Canterbury Village. It doesn't have trails. The one in Rochester Hills, bordering, was that Shelby there? They've got wonderful trails. It's a very pretty location. Lots of fudge factory and ice cream, and it's very clean. They got a lot of people working there. There are those lines, but it's very efficient. Very efficient. Any other favorites? And I hear they have a great cookbook, a Cider Mill cookbook. So with my writing background, I'm going to pursue Cider Mill books. So in a couple years when they let me come back and do this again, maybe I'll have something for you. Do we have anything else? No, that was it. Okay. So, I have worked for Goodison, full disclosure, so I am fond of their cider. But it's not just because of that. I think they do a really good job with their cider. Rochester does a nice job with their flavored ciders. And you don't find those very many places. So if you like a grape or a pear cider or a cranberry, when they're pressing, and what's nice about Rochester is they hang a little sign out by the road with the flavor that they're pressing. So if you're driving by and you see blueberry, and that's your thing, pull on in and get some blueberry apple cider. All of what they do is untreated. Untreated. So they can't sell it anywhere else. It has to be UV light treated or pasteurized to sell anywhere else. So, but as we mentioned, most of the local ones don't do that anyway. So the question is, does cider spoil if it doesn't stay cold? It shortens the life. A lot of people like room temperature cider. So they'll take home their gallon jug and they'll set it on the kitchen counter and it'll stay there all week and it's fine. Right? Cider that is pasteurized, you're going to get 3 or 4 weeks out of it and refrigerate it. Unpasteurized cider or that is UV light treated or untreated, you're going to get 2 to 3 weeks. Refrigerate it. Again, only about a week if it's just room temperature. So, you know, it's fine to put in your car and drive up north, pick up when, you know, when you're traveling around. It's just going to shorten the life a little bit. But good question. If you want to ship your favorite cider to a person that you really like somewhere else, take a little bit out, freeze it. It takes 2 or 3 days to thaw out. So freeze it solid. I would wrap it with saran wrap, just in case it leaks a little bit, and send it that way.